Welcome back to Loosening Up, the KA-EMDR podcast. I'm Danielle Ciccone, and I'm here with my friend and colleague, Michelle Topol. We're back with another episode today, talking about the implementation of ketamine-assisted EMDR therapy. And hopefully we'll have another great episode for you about how this is impacting the clinicians who are practicing this and the clients in their practice.
Okay, thanks, Danielle. Again, I'm Michelle Topol, and I'm excited to introduce our next guest on the podcast. Her name is Jennifer Taylor, and she's a licensed clinical social worker in Texas. And I know that she took our introductory class, I believe, in May of last year, and she's been one of our most enthusiastic students. She's had some really great results in implementing this into her practice and in her work with clients. So I'll be very interested to hear what she has to say.
Me too. Well, enjoy this episode. All right. Hello, Jennifer. So good to see
Hey,
you.
you too.
Thank you
Both
for
of you.
joining us.
Of
So glad
course.
you're here. We were very excited to invite you on.
I'm happy
So
to
really
be
looking forward to this.
here.
Yeah. So do you want to just start with a little introduction? A little bit about yourself, a little bit about your practice, anything you want our listeners to know.
Sure. My name is Jennifer Taylor. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm based in Texas, but I'm also licensed in Kentucky, where I used to live, and Florida also. So I serve clients in all three states. Um, I'm fully remote now. I practice completely on telehealth, and work primarily with adults 18 and older. Um, and I'm really loving it. I was telling people recently I dreamed up this telehealth thing a long time ago, right after I became a mom. I was like, man, I could do so much work during nap time instead of going to an office. And now it's a reality. So I'm really grateful to have a good practice and able to do it the way that really works for me. That's
So,
great.
Jennifer, I know, or at least I think I know, that you've been primarily an EMDR therapist for a little while. And so I wonder whether you could just tell us a little bit about your EMDR practice and maybe what was it that made you think one day, I wonder what it would be like to add some ketamine to this. Like what got you interested then in ketamine EMDR?
Well, yeah, I was already an EMDR psychotherapist and really primarily, like you said, EMDR psychotherapist. And I I really do love the work and the ongoing training that I have, and that's my primary modality. And um, I'd probably been doing it for several years before I was actually searching for a referral for a client of mine. And I ran across a fellow clinician in Texas who was actually providing ketamine assisted psychotherapy. And those serendipitous moments where something just says, huh, you need
Hmm.
to look into this. I listened to that.
Hmm.
So I made contact with her. We talked about the client, and then I asked her about her cat practice. And for some reason at that time, it just sounded like my next path. And that was a few years ago now. And so I started studying ketamine assisted psychotherapy and felt really comfortable with it, doing the work psychedelically and at that time. And then, but I always had this inkling that these two really should be working together. Like there's a path here. I don't know what it is. I can't imagine. I'm pretty much a rule follower, and when it comes to the protocol, I really respect Dr. Shapiro's development and
Hmm.
all the research that went into it. And so I just was like, but there's a way. So I was actually in a training for EMDR, and like I said, I'd been practicing CAT for a little while, and I mentioned that to a colleague in a breakout room, and she said to me, "Oh, have you heard of the Ketamine Assisted EMDR Therapy Institute?" And I said, "No,
Hmm.
but I think I probably dreamed that up too." And so I had to find you. And so, of course, I did. And it, of course, when I learned the protocol, it like affirmed that feeling that I had originally, which is these two should really be working together. This is like the perfect marriage.
Mm.
And so I'm very lucky that I found it, and I'm happy to be learning more and more about it and getting comfortable with it. And I'm so glad you guys were just as inspired to create it and do all the legwork and put it together and offer it to us.
That story is something I hear all the time, and Michelle, I imagine is the same for you. It's like people who are EMDR therapists who then learn something about ketamine and about CAP. It seems like most of us, or many of us, start to get that feeling of like, wait a minute, these should go
Mm-hmm.
together. I've heard that so many times. It just feels like a natural um, collaboration, So just
Yeah.
wanted to speak to
Yeah.
that.
It's the perfect marriage. It really
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
So where did you get your ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, your CAP training? Were you like practicing that, like sort of on a parallel track with your EMDR practice?
I had been working, I had gotten my EMDR basics done, and I was training in that. And then when I found CAP, I mean, I never stopped training in EMDR, truthfully. So I'm always in consultation and always looking for, doing training. So um, I wasn't learning EMDR along with CAP, but I do develop both of those. So when I actually partner with Journey Clinical and got my training through them, and I've been very happy with that partnership ever since. And continue to train through them, any training that they offer. And they have a partnership with Fluence, so I get training through them as well. So I'm always keeping my ear to the ground on, what's the next level of training that calls to me.
Mm.
Um, yeah, but I guess they were sort of developing around the same time, but
Mm.
they kind of piggybacked.
Yeah.
Well, so if you would, can you just tell us about, I guess, how the training impacted you? And I think that very shortly after you did the on-demand intro training, you took the experiential. And so I'm wondering just if you could speak a little bit to what the training was like for you. And I know that you enjoyed the experiential or got something out of it because you came back and did it
Mhm.
again as a volunteer, which
Yeah,
I
I'm a
always
repeat
think is kind of
offender.
cool.
Yeah, well, I always do that when I do a training, especially one that I really just like, soak up. I want to immediately go back and do it again because I want to catch what I missed.
Mm.
I'm like that with movies or books. I want to read it immediately again, and what did I miss or what did I not catch the first time? So, of course, the next opportunity I offered myself up. The foundational course really helped me sort of understand. I won't recall everything, but understand the science behind what's happening in the brain and how that memory reconsolidation that happens in the work that we do is assisted so beautifully by
Mm.
the medicine. Um, and there was something about that foundational training that clicked something for me. I'm not sure I could describe it, but it's sort of the same as what happened with the experiential. When I did the experiential, something about the foundational course just clicked. It just
Mm.
sort of made it more of a visceral experience. So the foundations course, I would love to go back and do it again, and I can now that it's on demand. But I think just having the science behind it, there's so much out there to learn. That's what really helped me feel more confident about moving into working with people doing this work.
Mm. It's good to hear. Yeah, and
Yeah.
we kind of went back and forth about how much to include, right? I mean, there's so much
There is
research.
so much.
There's so much
Yeah.
we could have put in there, and we tried to really focus on the main bullet points of what do for someone that has no other training in ketamine
Hmm.
assisted therapy, maybe they've never even heard anything about it, that we try to give just enough to where you have a good understanding. You kind of,
Yeah.
you can build the rationale as to why would we do this, right? Without
Hmm. Hmm.
overwhelming. So, yeah, I mean, gosh, Michelle and I spent so much time poring over lots of research papers and what do we include and what do we not and what do people really need to know for this purpose, you know? So,
And for those of us whose brains don't work that way, we appreciate it because there's no way I could have gotten through all of that research and narrowed it down. And I was so, I know there's still a lot to be learned about psycholytic work.
mm,
Um,
yeah.
and that was what was kind of heartening for me about the training is that, it's another offering that I can make to people where the word psychedelic is a little bit too much in the beginning,
Oh, yeah.
and people who love the EMDR work, but um, there's some help that could be offered there
Mhm,
without, you know, the word psychedelic or high doses being introduced. So again, it's just sort of seamlessly marries the two modalities. And so,
mm.
yeah, I was really excited to be able to offer this to clients.
Well, so what has it been like now that you've been offering it to clients? Do you have any, I don't know, experiences that you'd like to share with us?
You know, I tend to get a lot of people with complex trauma. And, when they initially reach out to me, it's almost hard for them to describe what it is that they're actually struggling with. It's not always so cut and dry.
Mhm.
There's a lot of attachment wounds, but people don't call you up and say, "Hey, I have some attachment wounds I'd like to work on." It sort of comes out over time. And so,
Yeah.
the symptoms they present with are like, dysthymia or which is a low grade depression, or sort of like a general mood disorder that may not meet criteria for a major depressive disorder or, a specific anxiety disorder. And so, um, those are the people that tend to respond really well to ketamine assisted EMDR when it's hard to put into words what their experience actually is. And a lot of times I've discovered is because, they've built up all of these adaptations and protective parts over the years to get by and figure
Mhm,
life out. But that doesn't always leave us with a general satisfaction or even happiness in our lives. And so, I tend to get those people that can't really describe what it is they're looking for. And so, when I've introduced ketamine assisted EMDR to those people, it, I've heard, I think it was Dick Schwartz. I can't remember who it was. It might have been Bessel van der Kolk. I should have studied before I did this, but it was somebody who they referred to the mechanism that happens when ketamine or psychedelics is used in therapy. And they said, the protector parts just tend to go to sleep.
Mhm.
And that's what I've discovered with people like my complex, trauma clients is that if the part doesn't go to sleep, they're certainly drowsy and a little bit more cooperative.
mhm,
And that's been the most exciting for them to feel themselves be able to touch into what they've been protected from all
mm,
this time or what they've adapted to all of this time. It's sort of like reclaiming those emotional connections that they even forgot they had. And that's what I think has been really moving in the work that I've done in, the recent years since I've found this protocol.
That's pretty consistent with what we talk about or what we've seen. I'm curious, do you notice a difference? Because it sounds like you have worked with people, in more kind of the psychedelic dosing, and then, of course,
Mhm.
this is more the psycholytic. Have you noticed
Mhm.
a difference or maybe, something that feels maybe easier for people or better in some way or more even more effective in some way about working at this kind of psycholytic dose versus the psychedelic? I'm just curious if you have anything to share about that
Yeah.
piece.
I think insight for their own experience is a little bit more readily available with the
Mhm.
low
Mhm,
doses. And maybe not in real time, but really soon, maybe after the session. Whereas with psychedelics, it might be days or weeks or several
mhm,
sessions before those insights really come into clarity in their ordinary state, because the psychedelic experience is such a non-ordinary state. We're really just putting our toe into a non-ordinary state with the
Mhm.
psycholytic dose.
Yeah.
And so there it almost represents, if you think about it, dual awareness. If it's sort of like for clients, if they could describe it, at least the way I witness it, is that they've got one foot in ordinary state and one foot in non-ordinary state,
Mm.
but not so much in either one that they can't
Mhm.
float between the two. So I guess the upload of the insights is probably the thing that I've noticed is the biggest difference between that
Mm.
and the psychedelic doses. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, and Jennifer, in the clients that you describe, um, it seems like, and I totally relate to that when I think about my clients, is that these are people who, in some cases, for most of their lives, have been surviving. They're in survival
Yes.
mode, but they're not really able to thrive, right?
Mhm.
Um, but
Yeah.
also, it's interesting because in the clients that you describe, it seems like maybe it might be hard to make that past present connection that's so important when we're doing targeted work with EMDR, or even more so with ketamine assisted EMDR, because we're really looking to move that information to have memory reconsolidation. And so I wonder whether you can speak to when you have clients coming in who can't even articulate what it is that is the problem, or what they want. How are you able to make that past present connection?
Mm.
Yeah, that is tough. But I take that on as my job. It's my job to listen through that AIP lens for
Mhm.
what are the clinical themes here? What is actually happening in their current life that we can track back to original experience or original trauma. And it's not easy to thread that needle. And I don't burden the client with it because they tend to think more literally. They're looking for exact comparisons between now and then. And so there's a lot of psychoeducation that goes into that where, um, the ketamine really helps them understand it on an experiential level. Whether they get it logically or rationally is kind of irrelevant.
Mhm.
But the people that I've worked with, um, when they have done the ketamine assisted EMDR, it's kind of like something clicks. There's an understanding of what the connection is between what they struggle with now and experiences from the past. So I think it helps bring them out of their thinking, logical, rational brain into their actual felt experience
Mhm.
Mhm.
so much more easily than really any traditional psychotherapy that I can think of. Um, and, the ketamine acts as like a support agent to be able to do that. And so, like earlier, when I was mentioning that insight can kind of come, a little bit more quickly, upload a little bit more quickly, I've had people say, oh, I get what you mean by that
Mm.
now. But if they can get it on a on a bottom up level, then that just makes it all the more validated and affirming for them. And it helps to kind of let that go. Any
Mhm.
ties they have to the old experience, it makes it feel, it seems from their reports, more possible to put the weight of it down. Because in so many
Mm.
cases, as you both know, we use it as weaponry or we use it as armor when we don't even realize that's what we're doing.
Mhm.
We're protecting ourselves from um, re experiencing the trauma, but that also protects us from experiencing the other side of what we could be experiencing, which,
Mhm.
like you said earlier, is more of a fulfilling life, more of a thriving life rather than just surviving.
Mm.
So I love that part about this work.
Yeah, I'm really glad you're talking about that because what you're getting me to think about is, how we talk about just making things more conscious, right? And
Yeah.
it's not always cognitive per se, although
Mm-mm.
sometimes it is kind of this clarity, right? This kind of like, oh, wow, this makes sense. And it is kind of cognitive,
Yeah.
but I like how you're also talking about just the felt sense of kind of making things more conscious and becoming more
Yeah.
aware of, like Michelle's
Mhm.
talking about, that past present connection. Because in my experience, if you can't make it conscious, you can't change it, right? So something
Yeah.
about this seems to just bring things more to our conscious awareness. And I think part of that is because it is softening so many of those parts that are trying to keep it out of our conscious awareness, right?
Right.
But my
Right.
my experience is it's just soft enough, it's gentle enough that we can
Mhm.
let that information in without feeling
Yeah.
totally overwhelmed and flooded by it, you know?
Yeah.
Which is why I
Yeah.
really like working at the lower dose because it's gentler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
one of my favorite types of clients are clients who, in many cases, have been in and out of therapy for decades often.
Mhm.
And they come in and they're like, talking about whatever it is that is their problem or talking about some past experience that they're stuck in, like that they've sort of hit a brick wall. It's like, okay, I can think differently about it, but I'm not feeling differently. And
Mhm.
so I think what I've experienced in this work, both receiving it and also offering it, is that we don't just think differently about our experience, we feel differently. And that I think makes all the difference in the world.
Mhm. Amen.
Absolutely.
I say that to people all the time, especially my really brainy
Mhm.
clients that show up and they can reframe anything. They could write a
Mhm.
book on CBT. And for me, that's a booby prize. If you can understand where your traumas come from and how that shaped you as a person, great. That's like therapy 101, in my opinion. Now what?
Mhm.
Right. And so
Hmm.
I love what you're saying, Michelle, about like, I do like those clients that come in and they're like, look, I've talked about this for years. I know where all this comes from. They're asking for traction. That's what they're
Mhm.
asking for. They're
Mhm.
asking for movement. They sense something
Mhm.
is a forward, something is greater, something is, they can evolve beyond this, but they've just not felt it. And so, we're guided by what we feel way more than what we think. And so I always say to people, if you could think your way through this, you would have done that a long time ago.
Yeah.
That's not what this is about. This is about the experience. This is about the visceral experience of your day to day life. And so
Mhm.
this work really helps put them in touch with what that is because a lot of people don't have any concept of what that is.
Mhm.
They've been so unconscious for so long and leading with their noggin for so long and just don't feel like their life is satisfactory, but they sense something. So
Yeah.
I like that this medicine supports them in touching into what that something is, even if they couldn't verbalize it or I couldn't even verbalize it. It gives them a sense of, oh, yeah, there is more. Let's touch into that.
Yeah. And
Mm.
it's often pre-verbal, right? Like not even something that you
Amen.
can articulate, but you feel it on a very pre-verbal kind of level. Um,
Mhm.
Yeah,
so I
absolutely.
wonder, without giving, any identifying details, I know because you're in one of my consultation groups, Jennifer, that I know that you have recently shared with the group, I guess just like a big breakthrough that a client had or something that really, yeah, felt really impactful for you and a client of yours recently. And so I wonder whether you could just share a little bit about it without
Yeah,
giving, identifying details.
sure. I can speak in general terms because this happens a lot. One of the biggest brick walls that I hit with people a lot is when they have a blocking belief.
Hmm.
And I'd been working with a client for a number of years, and we kept coming back to this blocking belief, blocking belief, blocking belief. And it would show up just about at the end of every trauma road we started down. And not just say that we wouldn't get a reduction in their level of intensity or their disturbance. We certainly would. But, I started ketamine assisted EMDR with them, I want to say a few months ago now. And we were able to do a lot of good work, and a lot of that work was really getting them in their body, touching into their body, their visceral experience of their life. And um, that belief kept showing up, that blocking belief. And one of the more recent experiences after I had presented this client in our group consultation, I got, those magical moments that happen when you're sharing with other clinicians and they say something or they mention a word or they offer a resource or something, and it just hit the nail on the head. Not at the moment, but I knew I was going to use that in my next session with this client, and I did. And I have to say, for the first time, we got to a 0 SUDS,
Mm.
7 PC, all clear, and I was blown away. Specifically about this blocking belief.
Hmm.
This particular client was able to say their positive cognition with their full self, that is a 7 head to toe for the first time. That's been one of the most rewarding experiences so
Mm.
far.
So I know that blocking beliefs tend to fall into general categories, and I wonder if you could just share what the positive cognition was. Like, what was the belief that the client was finally able to embody?
Big feelings are okay.
Mm.
That was the positive belief.
Mhm.
Yeah. Because the opposite was taught, implied, modeled for generations. In
Mm.
fact, I think it has a lot more to do with generational trauma than I ever realized. This was carried in the DNA. This person's from a country that has a history of some major atrocities.
Mm.
And so they carried that in their DNA. And oh, it just moves me to tears when I think about it.
Oh, wow. I wonder, were they able to actually feel their feelings more safely in the session with the addition of the
Yeah.
ketamine? And I mean, because I guess
Yeah.
the way I'm wrapping my head around that is maybe there was like a disconfirming experience that happened
Oh,
in the
it
session,
was
right?
confirming.
To kind of,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's true. Let me how will I phrase this? Yes, they were able to feel it, but it wasn't as shockingly, it wasn't as big as I thought it was going to be. And I'm sure you guys have experienced this before too, where this the changes that can occur with straight EMDR therapy, but with ketamine assisted EMDR therapy, more so I'm learning now, is that they almost forget how deeply rooted those blocking beliefs actually were in their
Mm.
experience. It's almost elusive to the person how much of a shift just happened. And so at the end of that session, she was able to, experience her emotions, but she did it in such a matter of fact way, like she had always been able to do it. It almost, confirmed for me, like, okay, well, this was a big deal in their life, but healing doesn't have to be such a big deal. It can be one of
Mm.
these really beautiful, subtle shifts, and then they can just go enjoy their life in a different way and not even be able to remember how troubling it was before now. So,
Mm.
Hmm.
I mean, I was doing a bigger happy dance than they were after the session. I even, reached out to all my colleagues from our consultation group and shared the big victory. And, and they're just sort of like, yeah, I'm feeling my feelings. And so, I guess we have to celebrate that amongst ourselves.
Yeah. That kind of makes me think about, Bruce Eckert, who we talk about in our course. I mean, he says when memory reconsolidation happens, that old learning is basically erased, right? I mean, that's the term that he actually uses. It's not like we have to compete with it anymore,
Yeah.
that like that old
Yeah.
schema, whatever it was that was creating
Hmm.
that block, has literally been changed. So it kind of makes sense then that a client sort of has a hard time even recalling that challenge, right? Because it's truly
Yeah.
been like transformed if that memory reconsolidation process really happens. So that kind of makes sense, right? But it is
Yeah.
because we're going, hey, this is actually a big deal, but they're kind of like, oh,
Yeah,
I
Yeah.
don't know.
Moving
because
on.
it's been resolved.
Right. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I love, Jennifer, just like how emotional you get thinking about this
Oh.
client and just how rewarding these experiences are for us as clinicians to be able to be a catalyst for something like this. Like these kinds of things don't happen every day, but in my experience with ketamine-assisted EMDR, it actually happens pretty often. That we can
Yeah.
help people have these kinds of transformational experiences.
Yeah. I give credit to whatever the powers that be were that led me to where I needed to be to learn what I needed to learn to bring it to that particular client at that particular time. Um, you know, I I love celebrating for them, and I- e- even though their transformations are sometimes elusive, I can point those out. I can't really point out what part I played in that, and so I'm always just happy to be there and be a witness and be able to bring whatever genius moment I was able to bring, and however the information uploads to me at that time. Because you can't write this stuff. You can't. I mean, you can put protocols together and you can say, and when this happens, you do this. But you know what it's like in a session. There's mysteries and magical elements that I couldn't even describe that are at play. And I don't even pretend to try to, but um, I'm always just so grateful for the bravery of the clients that do show up at my door. And I'm just so grateful for the magic that does happen in those sessions. And um, it's very rewarding to be able to have something like ketamine assisted EMDR therapy in my back pocket because it it takes us out of the way a little bit. I kind of think of it as like a therapy doula. It's sort of like a helper in the room that stays out of the way, but gives everybody just enough comfort to do some really challenging work that if you look at it on paper, it's really hard and sometimes really scary, but it just sort of wraps its arms around us doing the work, me and the client, and um, it just supports us like a third supportive element in the room. So, I had my basic EMDR week, and my first trainer used to say that she thought of EMDR as like a warm blanket during her work with clients. And I didn't ever really have that experience with EMDR. I was always very appreciative of it and I felt comfortable with it, but I never got the warm blanket reference. And then when I found ketamine assisted EMDR, I totally get that reference now because it really does feel like such a warm cocoon for us, me and the client and that therapeutic alliance to be able to do this really intimate, challenging work with like this loving, soft support around us.
Oh yeah, that resonates so much. And I think,
Uh-huh.
at least in my experience, and I'm sure everybody who's been practicing this would agree, it allows me to relax, right? Like I don't have
Yes.
to worry so much about what am I going to do? What am I going to say? Because I just feel like we're being held. Just let this unfold. However, it. I almost want to say something like nothing bad can happen, right? Now that's obviously that's a bit of a stretch, but that's kind of how it feels, right? Where I just kind
Yeah.
of feel like if I just hold my presence and my attunement
Yeah.
and my openness and my curiosity, and we're going to get through this, right? There's just
Yeah.
and I did feel that a bit with standard EMDR. Um I felt like, okay, I can lean on the AIP system and
Uh-huh.
I can lean on the client's brain. We're going to be all right. But yeah, this just takes that to a whole different level of like kind of trusting the process.
Trust. Yes,
And
absolutely.
I
You
just
took the words right
noticed
out of my mouth.
I feel so much more relaxed.
it does help you not worry about your damn self so much,
Right.
even
Because
though you don't
we've got
realize that's
parts
what you're
too, right?
doing.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
we got rescue parts that are trying to do a good job and be everything for everybody. And, they're
Mhm.
trusting me right now. I got to show up. And yeah, I never realized how much of that was going on in the background. So ketamine assisted EMDR doesn't only help me feel more comfortable as a clinician with ketamine assisted EMDR, it helps me just as
Hmm.
generally as a clinician. It's helped me learn to trust the adaptive information processing model. It's really helped me overall be just a more well-rounded helper when I show up, I think.
Mm, that's awesome. And I mean,
Yeah.
clearly, Jennifer, you bring so much heart to
Mhm.
your work. It's so apparent. I've noticed it from the day I met you, right? So
Mhm.
I think you already have an energy about you, and this just dovetails really nicely with your natural, just who you are, you know?
Yeah. Well, timing is everything, I believe, the timing of how it showed up in my practice. I don't know if you know this, but I resisted EMDR for probably 20 years. I'd learned of EMDR in
Mm.
2000. And I was a little bit of a snob because I was learning an energy psychotherapy at that time. And I was really pouring myself into that. And I didn't want to look at EMDR. I didn't want to take on another modality. And so, over the years, when I finally came around to knowing that I needed to study it, that was another ding, ding, ding moment. Like, okay, here it is. Um, I realized there was so much about that original work that I learned that was very similar to EMDR. So I think that
Mm.
the clinician that developed that probably was learning from Dr. Shapiro and putting some of the protocols in place based on her work. So I was primed and ready for EMDR and actually had to unlearn some bad habits that I
Yeah.
was using to be able to, give fidelity to the protocol. But yeah, I think if I would have learned this years ago, it wouldn't have been nearly as impactful and I wouldn't have been ready for it. And I probably wouldn't have been the right clinician to bring this to clients. So it happened when it happened in perfect timing that has nothing to do with me or my thought process or decision making. So I try
Cool.
to trust that.
Well, so speaking of learning, um, the experiential training that you took, I'm wondering how that impacted your understanding of what was possible. And also, like, what was it about that first experiential training that made you decide, oh, I think I want to do this again and volunteer when the opportunity came up?
Well, I think probably because, in full disclosure, prior to doing the ketamine assisted EMDR training experiential, I had already done some training with psychedelic assisted psychotherapy through my clinic. And so I had already gone through a series of psychedelic experiences myself. It was recommended that we do that ourselves. So we really have a real knowledge base of an experience ourselves to be able to work with clients. And so I took that very seriously. And, I was in the middle of perimenopause. And let me tell you something, that really helped those symptoms
Mhm.
turn the volume down on all of that.
Mm.
There's so much about that experience, that transition in life that you're not aware you're actually struggling with until you get some relief from it. And so,
Mm.
along with HRT, I did, the series of ketamine assisted psychotherapy, and that was really wonderful. So I knew what a psychedelic dose
Mm.
felt like. I didn't know what a psycholytic dose felt like. In fact, I had a lot of doubt. I was like, "Oh my goodness, 75 milligrams? Is that going to touch?
What's
What
this
is
gonna
that going to touch?"
do?
Right? I thought, well, I'll be relaxed, but I don't, So of course, when I learned it in the foundational course, I knew it, I understand, I stood it, I got it. But then when I took the experiential, again, it clicked. It was the visceral experience of what I understood already on a cognitive level that made the protocol flow. And not only what I experienced myself, but what I got to witness in my training partner was really magical. And So I no longer doubted the low dose ketamine after that. I really trusted the medicine more after the experiential. No matter what dose it's given at, I trust it implicitly. We have an understanding, me and ketamine. We have a relationship now where, I didn't grow up trusting too much. So it's nice to be able to have a trustworthy partner on board when you're doing this kind of work with people. So
But
yeah,
but
have a
but
real
think
love affair going on with it.
but
Same.
thinking about practicing this in Texas, in that jurisdiction. I know for some clinicians in Texas, there are some roadblocks maybe that some people might encounter. And it sounds like that was not the case for you. So I wonder whether you could speak a little bit to, what it's like specifically in Texas or other jurisdictions where you might practice where, yeah, maybe it might not be so easy or there might be some resistance there. Mm.
Yeah, I don't really pay attention to that, to be honest with you. I'm not really entertaining people who are going to poo poo an idea that they have no idea about. And I trust that when the information comes out and it's delivered by people who are respectful of these medicines, um, and more people really experience it. And I think that there's more people experiencing it or have loved ones who are experiencing it that can speak to the healing properties far more than any legislators or whoever is trying to stand in the way because they are living in 1950. I have no idea what the hangups are, but I just don't entertain it, to be honest with you. I really trust that, like, I'm a clinician, I'm not a prescriber. They're the ones that are going to be the responsible parties when it comes to the medication and the handling and the dosing. And I just stay in my lane and do my part and speak the truth and stay within my scope of practice.
Mhm.
And I just try not to pay attention to the naysayers. Kentucky's a different story. Luckily, I found a little bit of a workaround because my partner clinic doesn't operate in Kentucky, but because of you guys, I found an
Mm.
amazing prescriber who's just adorable. And he's made it possible for clients to be able to obtain a prescription if they're appropriate for that and to be able to do this work as they are entitled to do,
Mm.
um, without a lot of interference.
Yeah, I'm glad you've had that experience. And here's the thing, I think we're talking about something very specific, right? Using this medicine in a very specific way,
Mhm.
in a way that not that there's no risk, but is, you know, relatively speaking low risk, right? Compared to some other ways that the medicine could be used. And I
Oh,
think it's
yeah.
just going to take educating, that's our mission, right? Is just to get the word out, educate more people about this specific way of using the medicine. I mean, if you think about it, you've got a highly trained EMDR therapist, a highly trained medical professional working together, evaluating the client, making sure that they're a good fit, collaborating, using a pretty small dose, in a
Mhm.
carefully prescribed way, in a pretty highly monitored way, if you think about it, in session with the
Absolutely.
therapist. So,
Right.
you know, I know that there's lots of different ways that people are receiving ketamine, and some are not so great, you know, but that's not what we're
Exactly.
talking about here. We're talking about a
Exactly.
very, very
Yeah.
specific approach that, frankly, I don't see a lot of, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me for somebody to push back and say, no, that's, not appropriate or dangerous, unless, of course, the client has some sort of contraindication, of course. But
Right.
otherwise,
Right.
we're
Right.
trying to make
Which
this
is
a
where the
very
medical
responsible.
professionals come in. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's
Yeah.
and I trust their job is to screen for that.
Yep. So that's kind of been our goal, is to make this something that is clear. There's a strong rationale for. It's not a mystery what we're talking about. It's pretty clear. And obviously, we are trying to start some evidence base to it with our study that we published and hope there's more research on it. But yeah, that's kind of been our mission is like, let's make this clear and um, really, I mean, frankly, like not really hard to implement, you
Yes.
know? I mean,
Yes.
obviously, like we
Yes.
talked about with our previous guest, you still have to have those strong, solid EMDR skills. Can't skip that part. But when you've got
Right.
that, we're trying to help people implement this in a way that's really not that complicated, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
But, it
Yeah.
really does help to take healing to the next level, um, and it's just so satisfying.
Mhm.
Like
Amen.
today is the end of the day on Friday, so it's the end of the week for me, and I did 3 ketamine-assisted EMDR sessions this afternoon, and I feel jazzed, I feel
Mhm.
energized, I feel joyful because they're such for
Yes.
me as a clinician, such great experiences.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got to say, in this work, there's always movement. There's always traction. Even if you
Yeah.
don't get to a 0, 7, suds, there's always movement, even if it's subtle. And that's very rewarding. I agree with you, Michelle. I could do more ketamine assisted EMDR sessions probably in a day more comfortably than I could a straight EMDR session. It
Yeah.
takes less out of you.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. When you see that movement, it's not so hard,
Yeah.
and it could be fun and it could be interesting and playful, even and creative. I've said before, to me, it almost feels like it's artistic. There's like a artistic quality to it sometimes.
Mhm. Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, it's just such a fun way to work. It really is.
Yeah. Yeah, it really touches you into your own creativity and it touches the client into a felt sense of their own creativity about,
Mm.
using the experience to create a new reality for themselves.
Mm.
Not altered reality, but
Yeah.
like really bring that visceral experience into their day-to-day
Mhm.
experience as a human being because life is not all that fun most days.
Mhm.
You got a lot of stuff to do and a lot of responsibilities and a lot on your plate. And so introducing people to this work and what it can offer them, just a little bit of a touching into what their day to day can actually feel like, that
Mm.
is very rewarding.
Well,
Absolutely.
we are out of time, so I wonder, Jennifer, if
Oh
there's
my God.
anything else that you
Shocking.
is there anything else in terms of just a message that you would like to put out there, or something that you might want either EMDR therapists or maybe potential clients that are interested in this work, like anything that you think that you would like for them to know?
I think for clients, I would say if you feel a little tickle of this being intriguing to you, start asking questions and don't stop until you get your questions answered. Find out where that tickle leads you. That's what I would say to clients. And if you're an EMDR psychotherapist, this is the perfect marriage.
Mm.
There just really is no two ways about it. This protocol works seamlessly with EMDR, and I cannot tell you how transformational it can be not only as a clinician but for clients too. And isn't that what we're all trying to accomplish?
Mhm.
It's not just for me, the relief of symptoms is not enough. That's just that's just not enough. I want more for human beings. I want more for people that are giving of their time and of their resources to putting themselves in therapy. I want it to be rewarding and fulfilling for them. And this is definitely, like you said earlier, it's a very simple process. It's very concise. It's very easy to understand. And it is such a perfect union between traditional EMDR therapy and ketamine assisted psychotherapy. There's no two ways about it. I just can't say that enough.
Yes. Jennifer, let me just ask you if somebody wants to either work with you, as a client or maybe just talk with you about your practice, what's the best way for people to reach you?
They can find me at jennifertaylorcounseling.com. That's my website.
Okay.
Um, I'm in Kentucky and Florida and Texas.
Yeah, we've got you on our therapist directory too, so
Mhm.
people can check that
Yes,
out as well.
appreciate
So,
that so much.
yeah. Well, thank you for joining us. It was lovely, as always, talking with you, and we appreciate you just pouring yourself into this process and trusting us, and like actually putting it into practice. And it just makes me so happy to hear that it's been a positive journey for you and your clients. And I hope it
Yeah,
continues. Yeah.
it will. You can't get rid of me now. Thank you both for
Good.
having me. I appreciate it too.
All
Okay.
right. It
Thank you
was
so
Bye.
much, Jennifer.
Take care, Jennifer.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.